Hello there again. This is John Burroughs, and I'm going to be continuing with my autobiography, 7 Years to Life. This is chapter 68, and the name of the chapter is called Jailbreak. I had been a service technician for just under a year when I received a repair ticket for one of the inmate pay telephones in the rec room at the San Mateo County Jail in Redwood City. At the time, it was a close race between jails and major airports when it came to generating profit for the company. The county jail, as you are probably aware of, is where prisoners whose trials were set to begin very soon or were already in progress were housed. It was not nearly as intimidating as a penitentiary, but it still created an element of fear nonetheless. Once again, this was at a time when cell phones were not yet a part of everyday life. That actually is a moot point because even today inmates cannot possess cell phones. The inmates had certain privileges for good behavior, and one of them was they were allowed in the rec room at certain times of the day to mingle and use the payphones located inside. They also had a legal right to be able to contact their defense attorneys. The privilege to use the payphones also provided valuable leverage for the guards when it came to maintaining order among the inmates. The phones were the inmates' only line of communication outside of visiting hours to the outside world, and that was a highly coveted necessity. Picture one large cell with a ping pong table, benches, and 8 cement posts that extended from the floor to the ceiling. Each of these posts had payphones mounted on it. This was the rec room. Surrounding the rec room were much smaller cells that usually had 1 to 2 inmates in each cell. Each of these cells had walls on both sides and the typical cell door with bars that you would expect to see in a jail. The rec room was one large rectangular cell that consisted entirely of bars. Even the ceiling of the room was made of steel bars for obvious reasons. The rec room had 4 doors, one located on each side of the rec room. The rec room doors and the inmate cell doors were all operated electronically. When it was break time, there was always someone on each of the payphones, and it was not unusual to see a line of inmates waiting at a few of them. If a payphone was down, it caused a lot of tension among the inmates because their break time was limited. So just one phone in disrepair could cause some very real anxiety between the inmates and the guards. It was for that reason and the fact that inmate phones were such revenue producers that any repair for them held the highest priority. Inmate phones were rarely broken for the simple reason that if an inmate felt in a destructive mood and decided to take it out on the payphones, he would often get his ass kicked by the other inmates because of what the phones represented for them. Typically, the guards would look the other way when a blanket party was being thrown for an inmate that screwed up the phone. When a technician had to repair a phone in the rec room and it was break time, unfortunately the inmates were ordered back into their cells and the doors would be electronically closed. The technician was then allowed into the rec room and the door would be closed behind him or her, creating the safest environment as possible for the tech to complete his work. I had never heard of anyone getting attacked because their security process was so tight and well thought out. However, reading the sign that said, "This is a no hostage institution," was not exactly comforting. It had a tendency to make you rethink entering. Jail phones that were properly working were a high priority for public communications. On this fateful day, I would become the exception to the rule. I entered the guard's office and he opened the doors to the rec room and to the prisoner's cells. Over a microphone, he instructed the inmates to return to their cells. After the inmates were in their cells, the guard hit a switch that closed all the inmate cells. He then told me to go into the rec room and repair the phone that was inoperable for some reason. I went into the rec room and the guard closed all the entry doors to that room. At least, that is what we both thought. I took the upper housing off the telephone in order to see what might be the cause of the malfunctioning. The problem was twofold. The totalizer needed to be cleaned and the relay was shorted out, causing dial tone to cease. I removed the coin chute that the totalizer was attached to and started to unscrew the totalizer. I was completely surprised when I felt a forearm inserted under my jaw, semi-choking me, and the person's other arm had removed a long screwdriver from my belt and holding it with considerable pressure against my neck. It was almost instantly that I heard a voice over the loudspeaker telling the inmate to get the F back to his cell before things get worse. The inmate refused, and I had become his leverage to escape, and the no hostage sign took over my logic to the point that panic was creeping in rather quickly. I was also in a state of confusion because this guy had to be incredibly ignorant, or desperate, or both. The jail in this case was on the 7th floor, and even if he was able to extricate the both of us successfully from the jail, we had to get to the first floor that happened to contain a multitude of courtrooms and law enforcement officers just about everywhere you looked. He never got me outside of the jail because a guard in the control office could view everything that was happening in the rec room. He was continually trying to talk some sense into the inmate and distract him at the same time. I can remember feeling like I was going to black out. I kept internally thinking that I had no idea as to exactly what this guy was in for. In addition, I did not know how dangerous he could possibly be. All of a sudden, while these thoughts were racing through my mind, I felt myself being jerked backwards. I heard a commanding voice say, "It's all over now, TJ. Release your grip on this gentleman and give him back his screwdriver." What I did not know was while the guy was distracting TJ on the microphone, another officer had successfully maneuvered his way behind TJ and was able to get his baton lodged under TJ's throat and was now choking him. TJ was instructed to slowly relinquish his grip on me so I could step away from him. As I was doing this, another guard entered the rec room and approached TJ from the front while he was still being held captive from the rear. The officer that was now directly in front of TJ bent down, grabbed the cuffs of his jumpsuit. He signaled the other officer holding TJ from the rear to back away quickly by a nod of his head. The officer in the rear let go, and as soon as that happened, the officer in the front of TJ yanked forcefully upward on the cuffs of TJ's jumpsuit, causing him to fall backwards on the concrete floor, and you could hear the sound of TJ's head hitting the floor. I will never be able to adequately describe the feeling that enveloped me when I realized this crisis was over. Before leaving, I fixed the phone and asked the officer how something like that could happen. He told me that he had been there for just over 10 years, and in all that time, the electronic system that controlled the opening and closing of the doors had never malfunctioned. Well, 2 cell doors had not closed all the way, along with one of the rec room doors. I took a lot of heat for what I did next. I called dispatch, closed out the ticket, and even though there was 2 hours left in my shift, I was driving my van to the yard and going home for the rest of the day. I got home, laid down on my couch, thanked every god you can possibly think of, smoked more joints than I imagined possible, munched down an entire bag of Oreos, went into the bedroom, and passed out.